I have a confession to make. I am a gamer. Since I was very little, I had always been enamored with video games, starting my journey playing none other than Sonic the Hedgehog over on the Sega Genesis. From that point onwards, it was essentially history for me. Games, games, games. It was all I ever cared about, and to this day, it's what I still enjoy for most of my life. Just give me a controller and I'm going to town. But there is one genre that has always kind of afflicted me, more than any other: role-playing games. Appropriately shortened to RPGs, because nothing is more explosive than a game that forces you to think for once, am I right? Final Fantasy is one of those RPGs that has always stood the test of time more than any other franchise. It is by far the hardest and truest equivalent to Star Wars for video game culture. Its history and feel is so recognizable that it is hard to find anyone who hasn't heard about the name in this day and age. Even if they're not particularly a fan of it, they have heard of the name, and that's kind of the point. My first exposure to Final Fantasy is admittedly a bit shaky when compared to so many other gamers out there making video essays. I remember my Uncle Richie having the original NES Classic back in the day, as well as Mystic Quest, but I never really played them until much later. I was too fixated on World Heroes 2 and Sunset Riders at the time. Those games were mac-dab fun for my childish brain, even if I sucked really badly at them. No, my first time playing Final Fantasy was with the 10th entry, I think. My mother had borrowed it from a friend, and I was able to play it for a few days before sending it back. It was a mixed feeling looking back. I was too young to really comprehend what was going on at the time, and I dropped it for those exact reasons. I liked the summons, I liked Valifar, I thought Titus and Horan were cool, but there wasn't much else going on. It wasn't until Kingdom Hearts, which I will get to in another video, where I kind of jumped back into Final Fantasy in a strictly casual sense. I wasn't a hardcore fanboy who sought out every numbered game within the franchise. No, I simply went out of my way to watch some Advent Children and other loose entries. It wouldn't be until much later when I got Final Fantasy 13 and Final Fantasy 15, and to this day, 15 has been my preferred Final Fantasy game overall. That being said, I have indulged with Final Fantasy 7 and its plentiful spin-offs from time to time. One notable spin-off of Final Fantasy 7 continues to be a controversial entry within the fandom, but has always been one of my personal favorites even when diving back in. That spin-off being Dirge of Cerberus, an action role-playing game that's also a third-person shooter, rolled up into a single freakazoid ball. Arguably one of the first games to attempt at marrying JRPG tropes with shooter games, predating the likes of Third Birthday and Sword Art Online Fatal Bullet. A very rare kind of game, as Japan doesn't really fancy themselves much for this genre. They're not big on Doom clones or Call of Duty. Even among their action RPGs, it's always sword and sorcery rather than guns blazing. As such, I give this game some early props for doing something which was unheard of at the time. Something bold, something original. I actually would like more JRPGs with this gameplay direction, if only to freshen things up from the monotony of turn-based and real-time action games that you usually tend to see. Not that they're bad or anything, but I would love some variety. Dirge of Cerberus at the time served as the final chapter of the FF7 storyline, chronologically, with the next main game in the series, Crisis Core, being a prequel. Combining Crisis Core, the original game, as well as this game, and you fill out what is essentially a whole game trilogy dedicated to the world of Final Fantasy VII, not counting the Before Crisis mobile game because nobody gives a shit about that. And no, I have not forgotten Advent Children. That is a movie, not a game, so it doesn't really count. Still a good movie, it's just not a game. But enough dawdling, let's get on with the story, shall we? The game begins with the final act of FF7, with characters Yuffie and Vincent evacuating citizens from Midgar as meteor descends on the planet. Yuffie, voiced by Mae Whitman, detects another life sign within the Big Mako cannon, which prompts Vincent Valentine, voiced by the legendary Steve Bloom, to immediately go in and investigate. There, Vincent discovers the body of a mysterious scientist dead, the identity of which is a bit obvious if you've played FF7 proper or any of the other spin-offs, but I will hold off from disclosing it until much later and for very good reasons, or sort of good reasons. An explosion occurs leading to Yuffie rescuing Vincent at the last minute, and thus the end of the prologue. Cut to 3 years later, and a year after the events of Advent Children, you have Vincent Valentine sitting at an inn within the town of Calm, who had been called over to meet up there by Reeve Tuesti. At the same time, various townsfolk are celebrating like crazy. What are they celebrating? New Wi-Fi service. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Suddenly, mysterious soldiers with Tron lines start attacking in mass, gunning down some, hurting others in metal containers. In fighting off these mysterious forces, Vincent eventually comes across a seemingly young girl and a giant man with elf ears who introduces himself as Azul, aka Azul the Cerulean. The young girl, Shulk, is voiced by Carrie Walgren, who is known for roles in Devil May Cry and Fate Zero. Azul is voiced by Brad Abril, who makes a really mean Perfect Cell impression when he's angry.
Who are the opponents?
The two demand for an object known as the proto-materia and state that Vincent has it. Azul gets ready to battle, but the young girl, Shulk, collapses from exhaustion, thus forcing Azul to retreat. As the two head off, Reeve finally arrives, voiced by Jameson Price, with his newly formed WRO, or the World Restoration Organization, where Reeve explains the gist of what is going on. Here comes the exposition. So the mysterious forces are of a group known as Deep Ground, which were initially formed by the Shinra Company as a top-secret offshoot of the Soldier program. Mako-infused super soldiers kept hidden underground and raised to be bloodthirsty killing machines with little care for morality. Now that Shinra is no more, Deep Ground has essentially taken over as the new main threat, who are also led by their main elite unit known as the Soviets. The Sviets. Reeve then directs Vincent to the city of Edge due to reports of disappearances. Edge is also the city where Cloud and Tifa live, for those who remember from Advent Children. Don't worry, they're fine, and presumably Denzel and Marlene are okay too. In the city of Edge, Vincent meets Shallow Rui, a sexy scientist voiced by Kim My Guest with a mysterious past who also works for the WRO. Eventually, after running and gunning through, Vincent battles Rosso the Crimson over the proto-materia, leading to Vincent into unleashing his devil trigger, scaring her off. Rosso is voiced by Mary Elizabeth McGlynn of Ghost in the Shell fame, utilizing a stereotypical Russian accent because who doesn't like a sexy villainess who talks like that, am I right? Vincent is revitalized by Shalua within the WRO headquarters, where he discovered that Lucrezia Crescent, voiced by April Stewart, had been conducting research into chaos, with Vincent being a product of her experiments. Azul the Cerulean then attacks, where it is soon revealed that Shulk is the long-lost sister of Shalua, and that she's like 19 years old despite looking like a middle schooler. A boss fight happens, Reeve fires a rocket launcher, and Vincent heads for the Shinra mansion, the one in Nibelheim, to look for more information about chaos. At the manor, Vincent runs into Rosso again, but this time she manages to steal the proto-materia, which for some reason was lodged inside where his literal heart should be. Without the proto-materia, Vincent's devil trigger starts losing control. But before Rosso could finish him off, the iconic Wutai shinobi waifu, Yuffie Kitsuragi, suddenly arrives and manages to rescue Vincent. Meanwhile, WRO headquarters is attacked once again by Azul the Cerulean. Shulk is nearly killed by Azul's monster form. Shalua sacrifices herself to save her sister, leaving Shulk in a moral dilemma, but eventually sides with the WRO. With data recovered from the Shinra mansion, and the data which Shulk held as well, Reeve is able to piece together what Deep Ground is planning and pushes for a direct assault on Deep Ground's main HQ, which just so happens to be right below the Shinra building, in Midgar. Through the combined data, it is explained that just as when people die, they return to the life stream, when the planet dies, so too does it return to the cosmos. When the planet enters the brink of death, the Omega weapon emerges, who is meant to gather the life stream and travel the galaxy for a new planet to restart the cycle of life. If that sounds familiar to you, this is basically what Jenova and Sephiroth were trying to do back in FF7 and Advent Children. Ironic how the planet has its own dedicated monstrosity to do this sort of thing, which also begs some questions about Jenova's original morality. Like was she really evil in the beginning, or was she just the Omega weapon equivalent to some other planet and was just traveling the cosmos for a new planet to restart life on? I'm probably wrong and way off, but food for thought. Deep Ground, by sacrificing billions of pure untainted souls, is trying to trick the planet into thinking it is dying so that Omega can be unleashed and absorb the life stream. To control this Omega weapon, they need the proto-materia, which is also used to control chaos, which was originally meant to be this vanquisher of evil souls to help cleanse the planet of taint. At the Battle of Midgar, we get a number of cameos from classic heroes like Cloud, Tifa, and Barret, assisting the WRO while Vincent pushes deep into the Hornet's Nest. We also get this weird side mission involving a WRO soldier who is implied to be related to either Biggs or Wedge. She mentions her brother having worked in a resistance group back in Sector 7 before the plate fell down, more or less referencing Avalanche without actually name dropping it. As FF7 Remake has no mention of either Biggs or Wedge having siblings, I always thought these guys were brothers. It only makes this tad bit even more confusing. I do think it is weird how a character with such connections would just go unnamed and remain a generic ally unit for this mission. Like, was this supposed to go somewhere, but they just didn't have enough time? Anyways, a boss fight here, a boss fight there, leading all the way to the Vice the Immaculate's chamber, where it is then revealed that it is actually Hojo, or rather an AI created by Hojo, is in control, having possessed Vice's physical body to embark on this nefarious scheme. Vice is voiced by David Bowe, while Hojo is voiced by Paul Eiding from Metal Gear and Ben 10 fame. This plot reveal is a little bit interesting, as throughout the game you actually see repeated glimpses of Hojo from 30 years ago, before the events of FF7 proper, but his face in a lot of them are just obscured in these cutscenes, as if building up a major plot twist. But if you've played FF7, then you likely already know who this guy is just by seeing him. I like to think that this was done more or less for newcomers who had not yet dived into FF7, because this was before, like many of the Final Fantasy games, got the habit of being updated and released onto every single modern console imaginable. This was like back in the PS2 era, so chances are you probably couldn't play Final Fantasy VII because it was still on the PS1. So they obscured Hojo's face to build up a plot reveal showing that this is who Hojo is. While at first the Hojo-possessed Vice proves a near impossible threat, eventually Vincent is able to overcome him, and thanks to the assistance of Vice's incestuous brother Nero, no, not that Nero, is able to wipe out Hojo's consciousness from Vice entirely. But even after Hojo is defeated, Vice decides to push through on the initial plan and awaken the Omega weapon. In the final level, Vincent activates his ultimate devil trigger and starts laying the smackdown on Omega, and with the help of Shell, reacquires the proto-materia, allowing him to properly control Chaos, and starts open firing with a brand new gun. After defeating Vice one final time within the heart of Omega, Vincent seemingly sacrifices himself to defeat the weapon as it tries to ascend from the planet. Cut to Gact playing Redemption at the end credits. But then, weeks later, Vincent is revealed to be alive, bidding his final farewell to Lucrezia, who is still trapped in her crystal prison. Shell, dressed in normal clothes for once, awaits for him to come out, informing Vincent that others, referring to Cloud and friends, are waiting for him to come back. The end. Oh, and the secret ending involves this mysterious character Genesis and a bizarre live-action cutscene played by Gact himself, being the hook for a potential sequel and a tie-in to Crisis Core. Ugh, so much for being the final chapter, but okay. Oh, and Vice is still alive. As said earlier, Dirge of Cerberus is the first of a subgenre that combines JRPG tropes with third-person shooter elements. But does the game hold up well when looking back? In terms of shooting mechanics, it's honestly not that bad, considering that this was more or less Square Enix's very first attempt at this hybrid genre. Shooting feels really good in this game, and you can remap the controls to fit whatever playstyle you wish. You start off with the handgun, which is called the Cerberus, but later acquire other gun types such as the Griffin, which is your machine gun, and the Hydra, which is your sniper rifle. I love myself a good sniper in my shooting games, except in zooming in with the scope is horrendous and doesn't really work as it should. You can also find dozens of weapon mods to tinker with your loadout as you see fit. Medium barrel, long barrel, materia keychain here, mods that reduce weight, mods that increase melee damage. One of the more interesting bits about this game is the lack of a traditional new game option. It's sort of there, but not quite. Instead, you have this chapter select where every time you play an earlier chapter, it hard resets your progress to the very beginning of that chapter. You do not maintain your weapon, skill, and XP when jumping into an older chapter, unless you're playing on EX hard mode, which serves as this game's New Game Plus feature. I'm not particularly a fan of this, as I think it defeats the purpose of a chapter select. It also makes collecting secret items like the G reports more of a pain in the ass, as you have to acquire them in a single go essentially, or else start over. It really feels like Square Enix was clearly drawing influences from Devil May Cry for this game, but couldn't figure out how to get the mission select function to work, or they might have run out of time and couldn't implement a system that maintained your progress without needing to go into New Game Plus. Who knows, I could be way off. Honestly, it's not that big of a deal, as this game is not that long in terms of JRPG standards. If you're good at shooters, chances are you will beat this game in a single day. Sure, you might get frustrated at the surge of damage sponges later in the game, but it does have some features that compensate for it. Whenever a player dies in battle, they are forced to start over from a checkpoint. When you die, you're given the option to cash in the cumulative experience points to upgrade Vincent to a few levels or so, or you can convert that XP into gil and spend the money on things like ammo and potions. There are even areas within the game that are deliberately built so you can exploit this mechanic, functioning as farming zones so you can stock up on levels and equipment, making the next run significantly easier. For that, I say that's incredibly generous. Stages are also not massive, barring some exceptions, and are often condensed into small corridors. You have a dedicated jump and double jump, but the game wasn't really designed for any impressive platforming with invisible walls galore, with the jump mechanic being mainly for evading certain attacks. There is a melee button, which is pitiful, but ultimately gets the job done. It's not meant for bosses, but rather for the weaker enemies to reserve ammo when necessary. Like most JRPGs, you have a dedicated shop that sells you various items such as potions, ethers, and their upgraded forms. One item, which they never sell, is the Limit Breaker, which allows Vincent to access a weaker Devil Trigger form with an entirely different moveset that also acts like a full heal. I usually reserve these for bosses, but the full heal really helps when in a bind. A bit of a disappointing bit about this game is the lack of playable characters. There is the Catch She segment, but I feel it wouldn't have hurt to have one or two chapters where you play as Cloud or Barret just for old time's sake. I mean, Cloud did serve as a Shinra trooper for a time, so naturally he would know how to use ranged weapons. That combined with the fusion sword as a melee attack, it feels like it would have been a really fun idea, and loads better than the cheap cameos we got from within the game itself. You don't even see Cloud in the game engine, just Steve Burton's voice over the phone and some full rendered CGI moments. And Barret? Well, it's pretty obvious why he would have been perfect for this game. Honestly, the soundtrack doesn't feel as special. It's not bad by any means, but when compared to tracks from like Final Fantasy VII proper, they don't feel as memorable. There are some good ones, with some stages having a decent jazz tone, and then really late in the game where they suddenly bring in some hard rock into the mix. It's all good, I like it, but not exactly the type of music you would expect from a grand and epic adventure like, say, Final Fantasy. But again, it ain't terrible. I do think it's interesting how, when compared to the other entries within the Final Fantasy VII compilation, Dirge of Cerberus doesn't really utilize tracks that reference the original game despite it being a sequel. No fancy remixes of classic themes like Bombing Mission, Genova, One Winged Angel, Aerith's theme. It's a very stark contrast to what we would get in the next game after this, Crisis Core, which didn't feel all too ashamed at winking fanservice tracks here and there, while also pushing its own original theme music. It is very notable as there are moments where you actually revisit locations from FF7, like the Shinra Mansion and Midgar, which would have warranted one or two tracks referencing the original game, but no, it's just a bunch of original tracks here and there. To some people, especially those who are more sick and tired of reusing songs for shallow fan service, I guess it would be something of a good thing, but for me, it feels ultimately kind of disappointing to the overall experience. It makes Dirge of Cerberus seem less like a Final Fantasy VII game and more like a generic action game with FF7 slapped on. This, along with the tagline saying this being the final chapter of Final Fantasy VII, the saga, just comes off as very bizarre in terms of business decisions, which I hope they fix in a future HD release. While far from a perfect game, it was indeed the first of its kind, essentially. Combining JRPG elements with shooter games is something that is rarely ever done even by modern standards. I can only think of maybe a few games on a single hand which come close to mind, and that says a lot about how rare this subgenre actually is. And it all technically started with this game, and hardly anyone brings up this fact. For this reason, I do hope this game receives a good remaster, be it a proper one or a pseudo remake like with Crisis Core. There is some good stuff here, and it would be a shame to just have it all be ignored. Was it really that bad? I certainly don't think so. If and when a remaster comes out, I do wonder if the FF7 remake trilogy will have any sort of effect on it. If they do a proper remaster, it could be coming out sooner. If they give it the reunion treatment, then it could be much later after Revelation comes out, so as not to imply any spoilers for the remake trilogy. Maybe? I don't know, hard to say. Ultimately, I like this game. It is the reason why I wanted to do something different for this essay, where I actually give it my all and make it potentially longer than I normally would. It is a not so special game, but I gave it the special treatment anyways. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be working on more videos involving Final Fantasy, but also other JRPGs which have caught my attention. Lately, I've been thinking about doing reviews on the Shining series by Sega, as the Genesis classic has always been a good part of my childhood, and I wanted to do something really special for that one. Until then, I hope to see you guys again next time. Be excellent, everyone.